And if you want to, do you want to go ahead and share to the slides now? Yes, see them. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to our September Learning Before Lunch. We have our we're a little bit month behind, but I think it's okay. So to have a commemoration of Hurricane Katrina, and this month's speaker. Oh, that's fine. This month's speaker is Dr. Jessica Dauterive. Why can I say I can say it until I have to say it in front of people.
That's right.
Anyway,
You have the same kind of last name as I do.
it's long. It's like letters together.
Yeah.
So Jessica works at the Midlo Center here on campus. She is a UNO alum, and she also has her PhD from George Mason University. And her area of expertise is the Acadian region. Is that correct? But she has also been working with the Hurricane Memory Project, and so she will be giving us an update on that. And I'm going to let her give you more details about her as well. And our second speaker was Molly Mitchell, who was also in the Midlo Center, but unfortunately, she's ill today, so we will give her a pass and let her stay home. So I'm going to. So this is Jessica Everton. Sorry, I always forget this. I try to remember. I do want to thank the Legacy Society or the UNO Alumni Association for providing the pastry and coffee for us at every event, and that if you are interested, you are welcome to be a member of the Legacy Society or talk through the foundation. And I'll let you Jessica take it away.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. We'll turn this on. There we go.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. Good morning, everybody.
Let
me settle with this for a second. Okay. You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
So thank you all so much for inviting us to be here today. I say us because, as Laura mentioned, Dr. Molly Mitchell was supposed to join me today. She's the director of the Midlo Center for New Orleans Studies, which is located on the third floor of the UNO Library. If you haven't visited us before, we're a public humanities center. We do a range of different projects that investigate this city's history through time, with a particular focus on civil rights, but we do everything from podcast projects to physical exhibitions, digital archives, which you'll hear more about today. And we also work really closely with the history department, in particular our public history students. And so you'll hear more about that work today too. So forgive me also, we're gonna do a sort of back and forth kind of presentation today. So I'm gonna try to cover Molly's parts as best as I can. But I want to acknowledge that she is definitely able to give you some more context on some of the specifically UNO dimensions of this project. But I am Jessica Dauterive. As Laura mentioned, I am the program manager at Midlo Center. I started there about a year and a half ago as the program manager, but I am a UNO alum as well. So I did my undergrad and master's degree here in the history department at UNO, where I worked in the Midlo Center as a graduate assistant. Went off and did a PhD at George Mason University, and they were nice enough to bring me back when I was done. So I'll talk a bit about that trajectory too, because I think something that's been really interesting to us in the center as we reflect on the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank. For the past really 8 months or so, we've been thinking a lot about the anniversary and how we can honor it and reflect on that moment. And the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank kind of sits not just at the intersection of how we remember disasters, particularly Katrina, although that's certainly its sort of first priority, but it's been sitting at the center of the public history program, the field of digital humanities, which I'll talk about. That's the field, aside from Cajun studies, like Laura mentioned, digital humanities is really the field that I work in, and I teach digital humanities at the university here. And so I just think it's a really interesting project to think about over the last 20 years, how many different fields, kinds of memory work and digital tools have sort of collided around Hurricane Katrina. And so I want to thank Laura and the organizers for having us today. And I also, when I got the invitation, was it's kind of an interesting coincidence that today is also September 11th. So I want to acknowledge that there's, many ways that different communities in our country experience disasters and acknowledge and remember those disasters. But as you'll see in just a minute, there's actually a really direct connection between the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank and efforts to remember September 11th as well. So it's kind of an interesting coincidence, I think, for us to reflect on that too. So let me see. It's not working.
Down button.
Down button.
Do names like usually. This happens sometimes. And it's the wrong way. No.
Let's make sure that the battery is still working. Oh, it was off.
Well, working now.
Yeah. It was off. Is it working?
No.
Oh.
That's okay. I can click.
I said,
All right. So today I want to sort of go through 4 different ways of looking at the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank. And I was talking with a few folks before the presentation today. And what I'll focus less on is the actual storm and people's sort of experiences of the storm. I know that's differently traumatic depending on if you were here, what your experience was. So we'll really focus more on how the tool collected different kinds of memories. And I want to do that in sort of 3 phases. So first, I'll introduce the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank as a platform, what it is, what it took to build a digital archive like this in 2005, and its sort of relationship to UNO and UNO's responses post-Katrina. Then I want to talk about its legacies. Like I mentioned, it sort of sits at the intersection of all of these different developments over the past 20 years in terms of how we collect people's memories and share them online. And so we'll talk about the impact of the project locally, but also nationally and even internationally. The third thing I want to touch on is how the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank shaped our reflections of this 20th anniversary. So we've done a lot of work at the Midlo Center to create what we're really thinking of as like a season of reflection, not just one day. And so we've been working with students and community partners to really revive the archive 20 years later. And at the end, I'd be happy and would love to accept any questions that you'll have. In this photo is a little foreshadowing to the archive. This is just one of 25,000 things that are in this digital archive. As you can see, little Zoom guy is covering it. But this is a photo of a couple at Pontchartrain Beach in what we think is the late 1940s, early 1950s. And so what I think is really special about this image is it reveals how the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank wasn't just a record of disaster, but a lot of the photos that it ends up collecting are people's memories of life before Hurricane Katrina, decades, century before Hurricane Katrina even. So it really becomes this like evolving place for people to remember different moments, not just the devastation of the storm. Okay. So to introduce the project, there's a few different places and people we need to talk about. So at its core, the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank is a digital archive of community memories of the storm in the greater New Orleans area over time. And we'll look at the actual memory bank in just a minute. At the time that it was built, which was November 2005, was when it was launched. So shortly after the storm passed. Michael Mizell Nelson, whose photo you can see here on the left, worked with a team at George Mason University to build this digital archive. In 2005, this was not easy to do, right? So I think there's something I've really been working with students is thinking about the sort of ability now to just post something online incredibly easily, right? People are constantly archiving their lives through social media. Even at the time, people were blogging and posting things to the web, but that was a new idea. And so Michael Mizell Nelson was a history faculty member here. He was a historian of New Orleans. So if anyone's heard the sort of connection between the po' boy sandwich and a streetcar workers strike, that was sort of his research that brought that to light. And he also was a food and labor historian of the city. On top of that, excuse me, he was an early digital humanities scholar. And so in 2005, the idea that historians and liberal arts scholars would be using digital tools in their research at all was not a widely accepted one. But from an early day, he would build these digital websites for his students like myself at the time to tell their own histories. And so a lot of the work that he would do with his students were getting us to think about what our community connections are. One of the first digital humanities projects I ever did was oral histories with my relatives in Cow Island, Louisiana. If anyone knows where that is, most people don't. It's in Southwest Louisiana. And build a digital exhibit. He called it NOLA City Museum. And so it was a way for students to connect with the tools of doing history, right? Finding good primary sources, understanding secondary sources, analyzing it, and telling a good story at the end. But was a really early adopter of this and really brought a lot of that energy to the city and the history of the city. And so he was sort of primed already to be the person that George Mason called when Hurricane Katrina happened, and they said, we need to figure out a way to document this event. And so he was at the time, his house was on the 17th Street Canal. He and his family were displaced in Massachusetts with his family. And so before he even arrived back in the city, he was on phone calls, as his wife told me just a few weeks ago, 24 hours a day with this George Mason staff trying to build this website and get it off the ground. And I think it's a real testament to his work not being about his own advancement as a scholar, but about the advancement of the city's history and the people's ability to tell their own history. And so I always like to start with Michael because I think it's a true representation of the sort of heart that he brought into this work. Unfortunately, he passed away about 10 years ago. And so a lot of the work that Midlo Center has been doing is trying to steward and keep some of his digital work afloat, including the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank. I mentioned the September 11th connection. And so you can see at the top of the screen, the September 11th Digital Archive was a sort of origin point for this project. So George Mason University had a similar reaction after the events of September 11th. They were able to secure a grant and build a website that would collect people's histories and memories and stories of that event in response to the fact that people suddenly were able to document it, right? People were having digital cell phones, digital cameras, being able to record things in real time. And so the idea was we can create a record of this event that isn't just driven by what the media is documenting and able to print, but that everyone can sort of have a place to share their story. And so that collection ended up amassing, I think, over 150,000 different submissions. And that's like individual people submitting cell phone photos, submitting typewritten stories, submitting voice recordings. And so it still stands as this very vast archive. And so when Hurricane Katrina happened, they used what they learned from that project to build out the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank. And that was, I think there was still a steep learning curve, and the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank also was able to push that technology even further. And I'll talk about that in a second. What you see here, I can't show you the original website because it was 20 years ago, but this is a screenshot from 2007. So a couple of years after it was started. And if you can see, it's a constellation of different images. And so primarily what's in the archive are people's photographs. And if you can see at the top here, there's a button that said add your image. And so that's where they would be able to receive through the mail and upload people's stories. And I'll show you that in just a moment. But people were also able to just go to the website, click add your story, and upload it right then. And again, that was an intervention that wasn't really happening much on the web at this time. And so this collection, I think, is representative of the early days of the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank. It's images of flooded streets, of helicopters, of the Superdome. So people's sort of very on the ground experiences. But as I mentioned, the project really grew. I'm trying to think of how to do this, Laura.
Here, let me.
I'm gonna take this on the road for a second. And so I just want to show you a quick demo. Here we go.
I swear this should work.
Well, I realize I have to use the mouse anyway. So this is what the website looks like now. Today, this is me just pulling it up. So I think one thing I really want to highlight about this project is that it was started in 2005 and it still is functional 20 years later, which is not the case for many, many websites from this time. And that's a testament to Michael's stewardship, but also the folks at George Mason who continued to pay for us to host this website with them and continued to do maintenance to it. And so one thing we really are reflecting on in this project is how do we keep these kinds of projects afloat? How do we ask people to donate their archives and ensure that they actually do remain online and available into the future? And so the website still exists. One choice that they have made is to keep the design of it just like it was in 2005 for the most part. Something that is important to the George Mason team is that not only does this sort of document the history of Hurricane Katrina and the New Orleans area, but also that it documents this sort of moment in internet history. And so the design feels a little antiquated, but everything in it for the most part still works. So as you can see, just refresh, there's many different kinds of images featured. People were also able to write in their own stories. So I'll just click on one to show you what that looks like. It just comes up as a text block. People were able to click that add to the archive button and just type it in and upload. There was no word limit. So some of these stories are 2 sentences long. Some of them are, if I printed it out, would be 5 or 6 pages long. People could submit anonymously or include their name. And they could also choose to just submit it to the team. So they didn't want it publicly available, but they wanted it available in the archive to have their story in there, but also for researchers in the future. So in addition to, where's my mouse? That I just wanted to highlight a few of the collections that are in this archive. So there's really big collections. So the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History was one of our partners on this work. And so they ended up donating a very large collection of over 900 photographs. And this was primarily experiences of first responders after the storm once people were able to get back into the city. So there's pages and pages of these from the Smithsonian. We also have a large collection from different military operations. So the Coast Guard, for instance. One of the people working on the website happened to be in Port Arthur at the time because her husband was in the Coast Guard. And so they were able to do a sort of much wider sweep of photographs that didn't just center New Orleans, but the whole Gulf Coast area that was hit by the storm. And so these are kind of broken up into different collections, which you can see, you know, while most people in the media just saw George Bush sort of flying overhead, they have images of actually meeting with him. So something really interesting about this archive is that a lot of times you'll find a photograph of a sort of familiar scene, but from a different perspective than you've ever seen it, because it's someone on the ground, it's someone in the convention center, it's someone meeting with the president. And so there's a lot of different kinds of photographs. There's also some in here of the coast of the National Guard sleeping in the rec center here at UNO. And so there are some UNO images in here as well. But like I mentioned, it's not just photos sort of the storm. There's also photos. This was a very small collection. So I think a good example of how we have these giant organizations donating hundreds of images. We also have this one man who donated 12, and he called it 121 Days of Darkness. So it was on December 27th, 2005. He just drove through Gentilly at night and posted them to this archive. And so I think something else that was really important in this moment is that people had all of these digital records of things and nowhere to put them. And so it provided people a place, you know, this might have just lived on his computer for the last 20 years, but now it's, I think, one of the more poignant collections that we have. You can see sort of starts in the quarter to start people in something that they recognize and then bring them to what was really going on in the city at the time. And talking about sort of different perspectives. Sorry, let me get this zoom out of the way. It also captures a lot of children's perspectives of the storm in the aftermath. This is a collection called Katrina's Kids. And it was collected by children who had evacuated the city and were in the Houston Astrodome at the time. And so a group of Houston area moms got together with the kids and asked them to draw out what they had experienced, what they were feeling. And so there's 130 or so drawings that these kids were able to express their version of the story through. And so that was always sort of the goal of this project, was really being able to capture as many perspectives of the storm and of the city and its history as possible. Let me go back to my slide deck. And they did that through a number of different ways. So like I mentioned, people could upload directly into the website, but I built a lot of websites for my job, and building the website is the first step, but getting people to actually come to your project is a whole other beast, especially at this time when people had a lot of other concerns, right, on their minds than going and donating to an archive. People were actively in recovery. And so they came up with a number of different ways to promote the project. The sort of earliest and first were these postcards that you see on the left. You can see on the very left, they were sort of still in that September 11th digital archive mode, where they make this card that says never forget, right? That's not a slogan that ended up actually taking when we talk about Hurricane Katrina. But on the back, this was 1 year after the storm. So once people had a chance to hopefully stabilize a bit, they put these cards around the city. They also mailed them across the country to different coffee shops and partners. And it says, 1 year after Katrina and Rita, we want to hear how your family and your friends were affected by the hurricanes. It invites them to go online, so do it directly. It also invites them to leave a voicemail. And this was another really interesting piece of how they collected this history. So I don't know if people remember Skype, the pre-Zoom video conference tool. So they used Skype to set up a virtual voicemail that I think was at George Mason, but they were able to give it a 504 area code. And this was really important to Michael, that when people dialed in, they weren't calling a professor in Virginia, right? They were calling a number that looked like they were calling home. And when the voicemail would answer, they had Delphio Marsalis, from the Marsalis musical family, record the audio. And so they would call this number, they would hear Delphio Marsalis's voice, telling them hello and inviting them to leave their story. And then they were able to just do that. And so those would end up, excuse me, getting transcribed. So the text would be uploaded, but also the original audio. Unfortunately, we've lost some of those in the shuffle. We still have the text. Some of the audio has gotten lost over the last 20 years, but was a really, I think, crucial way that they connected this to the community. And then at the bottom, tell your story and we'll save it forever. And so that was really important. Like I mentioned, 20 years is forever with the internet. And so they've been able to do it thus far. And there's no signs that it will go offline anytime soon. This card on the left is one of them filled out. So they would sometimes post these on coffee shops, and you could sort of tear this bottom part off. And it asks what about your experiences. On the back side, it was already paid postage, so people could just slip it in a mailbox. They didn't have to worry about getting a stamp. And this is from an 4-year-old boy. So him telling his aunt his story. And I think at this point he's in Los Angeles, talking about how he was afraid and the news was scary, but he trusted his auntie. And so again, really wanting there to be a wide variety of voices in how this site remembers the storm. This poster is something that Michael Mizell Nelson created that I think was mostly just put around the New Orleans area. Paint fades, archives endure became the sort of unofficial slogan of this project. And the X code that they used to kind of show that was, even after people are recovering and the pain is fading on your homes, we still have a place where you can remember. And something that I really just learned in the last year as we were sort of pulling this back out for the 20th anniversary is that this X code was the one that was on Michael's house. So he and his family's home on the 17th Street Canal got water up to the second floor. But the second floor was okay. And so they didn't lose all of their belongings, but they did lose their home. And he had the foresight to take a photo. And a year later, when they had an organization contact them about an art exhibit they wanted to do, they actually made this X code in foam and spray painted it red. And we have an exhibit up at the library right now that has that original foam X code. But he also used it to stamp this project. And I think it's another really good example of how even if it was sort of driven by this team at George Mason University, he was really like the heart of what was driving it and connecting it to people in the city. And the other unofficial slogan is trust the government or media to tell your story, do it yourself at hurricanearchive.org. So I think also, years after the storm, people are getting frustrated with insurance companies and with FEMA responses and have a lot of concerns, anger, frustration. And I think he was able to, he was feeling that too, right? He was also trying to get his own family recovered and rehoused. And so he was able to sort of pull that community sentiment into the project as well, which I think also speaks to his larger goal of just letting people tell their own stories and not trusting other people to do it for you. My favorite part of the outreach for the project are these Go Cups. And I just realized I should have brought our stack of Go Cups with us, but I think it's another really good example of why doing this kind of archiving work, local archiving work locally is really important. People at George Mason would have never thought to make a Go Cup with a project slogan on it. But he made these pretty quickly and would bring them to festivals. He was also one of the co-founders of the Po' Boy Festival on Oak Street. So he would always bring them out there. These were thrown at Mardi Gras parades. These were handed out at bars. And so he met the people where they were, right? And this was a really effective strategy for them to spread the word about the program, the project, and ask people to donate. So I want to move to think about the legacies of this project a little bit. I'll start with the impact on UNO, and this was going to be one of Molly's parts, so it'll be a little shorter than it was supposed to be. But as Michael was doing this work, he had always been a working public historian, right? Doing history with and for the public rather than for the academy. And Molly Mitchell had joined the history department recently as well, who is also a public historian. And so after the storm happened, he had gotten this project off the ground. Other UNO faculty were also doing Katrina related projects. So Connie Atkinson, who was the former director of Midlo, did an oral history project with her students, her public history students. And so they realized like we have this real strength in our department of historians who have connections to the community and really tap those and train their students to respect those as the sort of primary way we do this work. And so the project and Michael's work in the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank sort of was an origin point for what has become now a 20-year public history master's program at University of New Orleans. It's the program that I graduated from, and I think it's been incredibly successful for students like myself who went on to do a sort of more traditional PhD track. But we have students placed at museums, the Historic New Orleans Collection, the Archdiocese, the National Park Service, all over town. We have UNO students because of this program working in different kinds of history work. And so that I think has been a huge over the last 20 years, a huge legacy of this work. It also, as I mentioned, shaped a generation of digital humanities students and scholarship. And the way we sort of understand digital humanities now is using digital tools to do research, whether that's finding things online in a catalog, whether that's doing sort of data analysis, whether that's publishing your work online, as in the case of the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank. But that field's really grown from this very marginal one person like Michael working in a department trying to convince everyone this was legitimate to now being a field in its own right. And so there's been a lot of things that have shaped this field, but the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank, as I mentioned, had to be hand-built a couple of months after the storm. It led to the development of a tool that's called Omeka. And without going too much into the technical details, you can easily install it and it immediately allows you to upload items. So the different submissions that people put in the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank, group those into exhibits. And so the idea was, okay, we want to be able to make a tool that doesn't require communities to call George Mason when they want something archived. We want to give the tool to the communities to train them, make it easy enough to where in an afternoon they could learn to do it themselves. And so Omeka over the last 20 years has become a sort of gold standard tool for how this work happens. There's thousands and thousands of Omeka projects across the world. And the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank was a big inspiration for how they developed the tool. especially around the contribution plugin. So letting people sort of say, I want to add my story directly rather than having to go through an authority to approve it or add it. And Google Maps was also just coming out as a public tool in 2005. And so they were able to use that to build a way that people could submit something from their home and also be able to tag it on a map. And so there are these two legacies that now are just commonplace in the work that we do as digital humanists that the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank really set them on the course for. And it also has developed a ton of different kinds of disaster archiving. So these are just 3 examples of hundreds of sites that have done the similar model. The first one is a sort of traditional historical site of the Bracero program, which brought Mexican agricultural workers to the US from the 40s to the 60s. And so there's some more traditional storytelling. There's essays and exhibits, but there's also a place for those workers and their families to actually go and tell their stories of their experiences in this program. So that's sort of one model, is we do a more traditional history exhibit and we ask people to respond. There's been a lot of sort of protest archives and events that are more like finite social events. And so this is just one example of the Baltimore protests in 2015 as a way for community members to spin that up and capture people's stories, what people are witnessing, but also the sort of ephemeral material, so protest signs, things like that. So that's another sort of legacy of this project, is people are able to capture these events in real time as they're happening. And the bottom one is Journal of the Plague Year, which came out in, I think, April of 2020. And it captures the sort of early histories of COVID-19, particularly during lockdown and quarantine, but it still goes on today. And UNO is actually one of the bigger contributors to this project. So the Midlo Center contacted them and had UNO students going out in the community. And as I was scrolling through it last night, there was a very interesting kind of parallel between the ways that people were boarding up buildings and COVID-19 with the same kind of humorous graffiti and images spray painted on these boards, as you see in the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank. So it just kind of struck me that, you know, there's a certain kind of humor that you only find in an archive of disaster in New Orleans. And that shows up in this one too. And, you know, ultimately, its main goal was to leave behind this record of an event. And so a lot of it was about sort of pushing back against the media narratives that were being told about the city, people's frustrations about how their story or their communities were represented or misrepresented. And so you see a lot as the archive progresses, you see a lot of people sort of speaking directly to FEMA, speaking directly to CNN, speaking directly from their hotel in Atlanta, and just expressing their frustration as to what's happening, or the city that they, in one instance, they say they don't even recognize on TV, right? And so I think over time, it creates a really, really brilliant archive of all of those experiences. And I just want to end by talking about what we're doing now. So as I mentioned, over the past 8 months or so, we've been really thinking a lot about this project, about what it's given to the field, to UNO, but also what's inside of it, which a lot of things have been written about this project that really focus on those technical aspects that I mentioned, but not a lot has been written about what's actually inside of that archive, the photographs, the stories. And so Dr. Mitchell and I wrote a piece for Southern Cultures. This is the issue image on the screen that just came out a few weeks ago. Excuse me. And it's called Katrina's America. So it's many different perspectives on how we think about Hurricane Katrina now and what it tells us about the US broadly. And so we put a photo essay together that pulls some of the images that we found the most sort of poignant or representative. If you use QR codes, that will take you to the issue. It's freely available online, our contribution as well as the whole issue. I'd also be happy to share the link with you after if you're interested. But we felt really sort of honored to be the ones that were able to write that story, because it's in part a memorial piece to Michael and his work, Michael Misa Nelson, as much as it is a way to sort of honor and reflect on the memory of the storm and the community. And that work sort of led into a course that I taught last spring, which was a digital humanities course. I had 25 graduate students in the history program and undergraduate students who, as their sort of final project, went into the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank. Show you just a peek of that now. And using the tool Omeka that I mentioned, this is obviously a much more updated version of that. Here we go. We were able to pull out one collection that is my favorite, I think, of the whole 25,000 items, and it was called Do You Know What It Means? It was collected in 2008, and the idea was going into these neighborhoods, finding whoever that community leader was, whether it was a neighborhood association president, whether it was someone at a local history society, and ask people to donate what survived the storm, what family memories, what photographs they had, and wanted to preserve this way. And it was particularly the highest, the hardest hit areas across the city. So there's a big collection from Lakeview. There's a big collection from the Lower Ninth. There's a lot of collections from St. Bernard Parish as well. So also representing these communities that I don't think were as represented in the ways that people remember the storm. And so the way the students came up with this idea actually of framing it as a community scrapbook. So every time I refresh, it shows you 3 random images. And as you can see, it's a range of communities, a range of time periods. And then the students also were asked to work together to find themes that connected all of these images. There were about 1,000 of them. And the instructions were very simple. They were just not neighborhoods. Like we wanted to find the connections that connected people across the city because the neighborhood connections were already there. And they came up with some really beautiful ideas. So traditions and celebrations, love and joy, traces of water. This was one of my favorites, living with water. And the idea here was, sure, we have these storms living in Southwest Louisiana or South Louisiana that's just part of life. But there's also ways that we live with water in positive ways. So that's what they wanted to pull out. Here's that couple again. But so I just loved this approach, taking people's family mementos from these different areas and just sort of showing the ways that we gather, we love, we celebrate, we fish, we work. So the ways that our lives are marked with water. And I would encourage you, the postcards that were on the table in the front, there's also a website and a QR code on the back that will lead you to their work. I think they did a really beautiful job if you're interested in looking more into that. We're not quite done yet. And that particular exhibit, but that whole experience working with the students and seeing it through their eyes, led to the development of this exhibit that you see at the bottom of the screen. That is currently up on the 3rd floor of the library. We're able to actually open it on August 29th. And this is a photo from the opening. As you can see, this is that red X code that was on Michael's door that marked the project. And these whole first 4 cases, we printed out photos from the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank. So they were originally physical, put in the digital archive for 20 years, and we made them physical again, and arranged them like a scrapbook. And so I really took the students' idea to heart. And so if you view it, you'll see this is a sort of neighborhood scrapbook. And then there's a case of living with water and a case of people celebrating in New Orleans through time. And that sort of is how we wanted to lead people into this commemoration. The rest of the exhibit talks about the different ways that water has marked our lives as Gulf Coast residents, particularly New Orleans residents, and placing Katrina in sort of a much broader history, while also honoring and reflecting on that event itself. So I would invite everyone, if you're on campus right now, but if you're near the library, it's a really, I think, wonderful exhibit. And there's also one downstairs that Midlo Center worked on with some community partners. That's an oral history of labor organizing in the city. And so those are sort of connected, and especially responses to Katrina. So that's it for me. I wanted to bring back the poster because I think Paint Fades, Archives Endure is a really poignant thing to remember now, 20 years on. And that this is still a possibility for us today to be able to be telling our own stories and using digital tools to do that. I have our emails up there. Please feel free to reach out to either of us. You didn't hear from Molly today, but you're welcome to email her. And I also just wanted to invite everyone. We have a website, midlocenter.org. We do a lot of different book talks, community events. And so we'd love to have you join our mailing list, stay in the loop with what we're doing. So with that, I want to say thank you and ask if there's any questions. Yeah.
I have forgotten what the numbers are in the 4 spaces on the X code.
Yeah. So the date is the date's at the top. This was, I think it's technically like hazards, but it was typically used for pets. So there were no pets in the house. This is people who were found either living or dead. And in this case, there was nobody. And then this would be the unit that arrived at the house. And I don't remember what MO was exactly, but Missouri.
Yeah, those were the state's initials.
Okay.
We have New Jersey.
Yeah. And that's one of the things, I'm sorry. We didn't have that in the original exhibit, but that is now an addition we're putting as a little diagram in there to show what those mean. Because I think at the time we weren't thinking about getting that sort of technical and historical, but I think now we're going into sort of add some of that context. So appreciate the question. Yeah.
You mentioned that like it wouldn't last forever. So if it could go down, what would happen to the data?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it is as stable as a website can be, because George Mason University's servers are the place that maintains and hosts it. They have an IT team at the university. They also have a whole center that's devoted to digital humanities projects. But I think if it went down, and I think this is a hazard for a lot of these legacy projects, a lot of digital projects over the last 20 years are starting to show age or aren't available. And so something we're working on at the Midlo Center is, without getting too technical, thinking about how we can do sort of community-based archiving. There's ways to sort of make a copy of websites that don't take up a lot of storage space on your computer. And so we're looking at different ways to deposit those with various organizations of our most rooted community histories, so that there's sort of multiple copies of them. But another sort of wave, I think, of thinking about this is that some of these projects will just go away. And so I think the archival ones are the ones that we're really striving to protect. But we have some other ones that are more narrative that we're starting to think of more as a gallery exhibit. Like gallery exhibits aren't up forever. So how do we make a record of what it was? But sometimes the websites will go down. But right now, that's what we're thinking towards, is how do we make copies for the community members to hold themselves? Yeah.
Do you know if the George Mason projects are funded by federal grants?
Yes. And so are a lot of ours. We were lucky in this recent wave of funding restrictions. We lost one grant, but we were at the end of it. So we'll be able to finish that project. George Mason lost a lot of money. And that's, so I went to grad school there and I worked at the Center for History and New Media. And I think they'll be able to weather it, but I think will have a really big impact on what kinds of projects we'll see over the next few years. Yeah.
Yes, in the beginning, you were showing a website, and I believe it was from the home page. You pointed out a story that said read more. So you went to that text block page.
Yeah.
I had a question about that.
Sure. This one?
Yes, at the bottom, citation.
Yeah.
Access September 11th, 2025, which is you looking at that right now.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? What does the citation mean? What is the purpose? Why happen?
Yeah, good question. So in the back end, you can see more info about like the exact time this was contributed. This is included if people want to use this in a publication or in a museum exhibit. So this is Chicago style, I think. So the idea is this one wanted to be anonymous, so there's no author or title, the place it came from, and then the access date is the traditional way of citing something that you access online to show the last time the author accessed that.
But why do you need that information?
Because people use these in their publications. So that would be if someone used this story in an article they were writing.
Oh,
Yeah, that's what they'd use to cite that. and to direct people back. Yep,
Nice.
absolutely. Yeah,
As far as the internet goes, is the Wayback Machine useful to historians such as yourself?
it's so useful. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. I failed to mention they recently came out with a new tool, and I'm blanking on the name. Um, but you can use the Wayback Machine to archive websites, like you're mentioning. So if you go to the Internet Archive and put this, I'm not gonna do it right now, but if you put this URL in, you could see the copy of the website now, but you could also see it at various points over the last 20 years. The Internet Archive is an independent entity. It's not a US based entity. And so they've been able to stay fairly stable, although they've had some issues in the last few years with hacking and a couple of other things. That has been something that we do. They now have a plugin that you can put on your browser. And I also contract with the National Park Service. So something I've also been doing is going through National Park Service sites and sort of using that button to copy a record of those websites. And so that is definitely, I think, going to become how we archive these projects in the future. And it's part of that idea that I was, the community-based idea of literally decentralizing how we save things. So having multiple records. So the Internet Archive, you have to opt in for it to archive your site, for the most part. But there are a lot of websites that are archived there. The hitch is that it doesn't always support the way that the site was intended to be used. So things like Flash players can't be used. There's sometimes it's just a copy of the page, so like interactivity is really hard to capture. So for instance, like it'd be hard to capture this kind of map where you're asking people to actually move around and interact with it, but the core of the website, yeah. I saw your hand and then I'm you. Yeah.
Said Professor Michael uncovered a story about the po' boy. Could you say what that is?
Yeah. So he was a labor historian of the streetcar and a food history. And so because of those two interests, he found a story, and I'll pull up his piece. Because the unfortunate thing is he was so busy working with students that he didn't publish much of his research. But if y'all are familiar with 64 parishes, he has a story on there. It'll take me a minute to find it, but I'll share that with you after. But this is him. This is another project we run. And his streetcar story was that the origin of the po' boy was a streetcar workers' strike in the late 19th century. And a local bakery, I think it was Martin's Bakery. Do y'all remember? Martin's. It was Martin's. Made a giant sandwich to feed the boys who were the po' boys who were on strike against the streetcar operators. And so, here we go. And so that story, yeah, the 1892 general strike. I'm trying to find it because I remember a really great image that he would use. I can't find it. But this video that you see here too, he also made a documentary. I think it's on YouTube called Streetcar Stories that talks about that history, the origins of the po' boy and that sort of strike, but also the longer history of streetcars in New Orleans. It's a really lovely documentary if you're interested. Yeah.
I was wondering if you collected any memories of the volunteers who came here to help us.
Yes, very much so.
Because I was chaplain at St. Paul's Episcopal School during the treatment and after. But when I would get there early, the parking lot would be packed with people who gave up their only 2 weeks of vacation or their only job. Came here to help us, and some of them, including one of his friends, still comes back. It affected them so much.
Yeah.
So you do get some charity.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, I will say, let's see, what is in the archive was just driven by who found it and who donated. Sometimes, but that's what this photo is. And there's definitely Coast Guard photos, but then there also were just these individual submissions. So I like sometimes think of this as an attic. It's not very organized. It's very hard to find things, and you kind of just have to like go through until you find what you're looking for. But those stories are certainly in there.
Connie Hugo would be a great source.
Hmm.
Connie Hugo would be a great source. But she organized a lot of the volunteer efforts.
Okay.
Jen Tilly and the late to that.
Yeah, so I will say this project is closed. It's been closed for submission since Michael died. He was the one sort of managing it, and UNO students were the ones uploading it. So it's currently closed for submissions, but the other student project I showed, we are collecting contributions there from people who want to share their stories 20 years on. And so if she would be willing to share her story, that would be a place for it. Yeah.
See no hands. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Jessica,
Yes.
as a thank you for our speakers. We have tried to find something appropriate for the area. We present you with our Learning Before Lunch umbrella as the logo of our organization.
Wonderful.
And thank you for your time and wonderful presentation today. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Is Altobello will be speaking New Orleans in World War II. New Orleans goes to war 1917, 1918. So that should be an interesting topic. And World War One, sorry. And we will be here. And we will be here in November, but December we will be commuting at the library. So I'll keep trying to remind myself and you so that we get to the right location. So until next month, thank you for your time and attention. Thank you. We'll see you in October.
Thank you. Do you want me to close the Zoom?